And it looks like my stream is live. And sound is good. Sweet. Alright. So, I haven't done this in a few days because I've been super fucking busy and kinda because I'm a little lazy too. And I had production issues last time, so yeah. It's been a few days since I did this, but this is the second episode of me analyzing beginner's games from Reddit. And today we have a game from a user named Das Burger or something. I don't remember. He's yeknom02 um, on ICC, and he was playing this game with the black pieces. He said his USCF rating was 872 last time he checked, but we'll see if that's actually the case. So his opponent started out the game with, oh, and the time control, as you can see here, was game 45 with a 45-second increment or delay. I think that's increment, but I'm not sure. So he started out with the Sicilian, which is 1c5. Whoops, let's make those not get put into the annotations. How do I do that again? There we go. Alright, now these lines won't show up over here cluttering up our analysis. So he said he was trying out the Sicilian because he finds that with increased frequency of tactical positions, as opposed to with the Karukan, it helps him understand the game more quickly. I can feel that. I also play the Sicilian because I like those sort of tactical games. Sicilian does lend itself to those sharp games because of the very open positions it can lead to and the opposite side castling that is very stereotypical of the opening. So let's see how the opening progresses from here. Looks like he's going to play the con variation, according to his comments, which I am personally not very familiar with. E6, okay. So, pretty, pretty common stuff here. Now, if he had played instead of this, that would be, of course, the Najdorf. Um, and this would, of course, be the Dragon variation. So those are the main variations of the Sicilian. Uh, I mean, of course, there is the Scheveningen, which you can see, which is frequently, and these bishops will develop here, here, knights will come here, here, and then eventually you'll push these pawns. So that is another very common setup in the Sicilian. Um, since I'm not too familiar with the con, I'm just gonna have to kind of guess. I'm assuming it's something like this, as far as the setup. But like I said, I've never actually played the con, so I could be totally off base. Um, but yeah, a pretty standard thing in the Sicilian is that you've traded your C pawn here for the D pawn here, which means you're going to be able to have a strong center later in the game. So a pretty frequent thing to look for in a Sicilian is to not do that. To break with either e4 or d4 depending on how the game develops. So let's see what the standard mainline stuff in the con is. So it's usually either bishop d3 or knight c3. So let's see what white decided to go with. He decided to go with instead c4, the third most common move, leading to a Marsosi's bind type situation. So the Marsosi's bind is frequently set up something like this, where white tries to sort of lock down black's counterplay. This C pawn here is preventing this pawn from being pushed forward. It also prevents, I gotta stop doing that, this push here. So, additionally, this knight here supports here. So that's the sort of thing you see frequently in the Marsosi's bind. I keep messing this up. I gotta get better at this. So I accidentally deleted his comments because I'm a bad person. But he was simply saying this is the Marsosi's bind, which he's relatively unfamiliar with. So, as I touched on briefly the main ideas. Usually the Marsosi's bind is not played against the Khan, but against the accelerated and hyper-accelerated dragon lines. But we'll see how it works here against the Khan. Knight f6, pretty standard developing move. Is that the most common though? Let us see. It is in fact the most common opening move with about 18,000 games in my base. Knight c3 is pretty standard. Queen c7, of course, because both of these squares are blocked by pawns, so the knight can't come to either of them, threatening the queen. So it's relatively safe. And so we're still pretty much mainline. We go with bishop e3. It looks like the book recommendation was a3. I'm not actually sure why. Let's take a brief look at that. Okay. So the point is to keep the bishop out of this square, and the point of this push here was because we cannot push all the way to b5 like we would like to because of the c4 pawn, but we do want the bishop on this long diagonal. So let's go back to the main and begin to look at some more things that could happen. So bishop b4, and he says normally the Khan features bishop e7, but this looks like white has spent a tempo on bishop e3. So this pin looks pretty attractive. So let's take a quick look at the book again, see what the book says about it. It looks like you have played what is the main line in a relatively scarce position, about 55 games in my database. But my database is about 4 years out of date right now. I need to go through and add some new games. But it's good enough for what we're looking at. Bishop b4 is very good. One of the alternatives was, in fact, bishop e7. So, as he was saying, this pins the knight to the queen, and if he wants to break that pin, he would have to play the bishop here. But he does not break the pin yet. He plays a pretty standard move of bishop here, protecting both of his pawns. Now here you trade off, doubling the pawns. Let's take a look at this real quick. So what compensation does black have for giving up the bishop pair? So if we look at the squares, we have had this strong dark squared diagonal with all of these squares for that bishop. The knight, on the other hand, only had really these two squares it could go to. It of course didn't want to go back here because that's going back home. It can't go to either of these squares because of the pawns. And it doesn't even want to go over here. So This knight wasn't very good. I don't think trading off was very good here. Your bishop has a lot more maneuverability. I mean, just look at all the squares it can go to. Let's highlight all of these. Whoop, that's not one of them. And then, additionally, you do have this pin here. So another thing this bishop is doing while it's here is preventing the queen from coming here. So I'm not quite sure if it was a good idea to give up the bishop. I don't normally do this, but let's go ahead and see what the engine says. So here the engine is recommending just standard development with the knight to c6. And although it does appear that most of the games have played your bishop takes c3, let's look at the average rating. I don't seem to have it. Okay. But when we think we do notice it scores relatively low, about 33% for white, which is good. So maybe it is better than the alternative knight c6. Let's take a brief look at that. So here runs into maybe, but I think we would play this just to be safe. Um, and then maybe something like that, but that seems like maybe white made an accuracy. Maybe we need to play this. So this seems like a pretty standard position that could arise in a Sicilian. The position here looks a little equal. Maybe what you played will work out a little bit better now that because this knight does now have the ability to move a little bit. I'm not really sure where it's going to go. I think I would probably play something like this, and you would play this to force off the exchange of bishops if we're trading anything. So, and white seems to have lost any of that opening advantage that it has. The last position is still a little cramped, but we've traded off enough pieces that it's all right. Um, the one good thing to note on your bishop takes c3 is that black is cramped in bind-like situations, and a very good thing to do when your position is cramped is trade off pieces. Um, when your position is cramped, it's because your pieces are running into each other. So if you can get rid of a piece, your other pieces have more space to move. So say somehow we could trade off these pawns after castling, of course, for these two pawns. Now, our bishop here has a lot more squares it can go to, as opposed to nothing. So just by trading off a little bit of material, you freed up a piece. So that's something to keep in mind when you are behind. So that is one upside to having traded off the dark squared bishop. So moving on, we see take c3. So now we have a weakness to attack. So let's look at a few weaknesses that black now has to attack. Of course, this is a backwards pawn, but it is also a doubled pawn. So this is a very, very good weakness to attack. So you can attack this, and then to a lesser extent, this pawn as weaknesses. Another weak pawn will be this isolated pawn over here. So these are the weaknesses that you're likely going to want to play on if you end up playing on the queen side. On the king side, The weaknesses are a little less apparent because there's not an obvious way to attack them, but if you can somehow play something like this, come on, oh my god, we want to play this after this, then maybe here and here would become weaknesses. Simply because there's only a single piece defending this, and it's going to be very difficult for anything other than the queen to come around and defend it. So if he tries to defend with the queen, you could play something like our queen here. And that seems like it might be a little difficult to defend if you want to try and pick off that pawn. But that's likely not the best way to play. As you pointed out, the pawn on d3 is a low claustrophobic. That is definitely the best target you want to make. So you play d6. Very good move. Um, just freeing up a little bit of space for the bishop. You can't... I think another good move may have been to put the bishop along this diagonal. If you decided you wanted to attack this square, but you're probably planning on playing on the queen side, so d6 is a very good way to do that because you can get the bishop over here. Whoop, that was not what I wanted to click. Bring the bishop up here, and likely along this diagonal somewhere. And that could be pretty good. You say about the move that it is a very Shevingen-esque position. You want to clear the d7 for the knight, so ignore the things I typed or shown, because you were planning to play knight here. That looks like a reasonable idea. That means you're probably likely planning to play the bishop onto this diagonal for a bit, but I'm not sure. We'll see what you say in a bit. Let's see, you have alternate variations that you looked at, it appears. My computer's freaking out. I'm sorry, guys. Let's give this a second. There we go. He figured it out. He figured it out. You looked at d5. E takes d5. D takes e5. Bishop g5. Queen. Force a trade-off. That's a decent variation to look at. You do note that the position is very open and he does have the bishop pair, which is bad for you, which is very true. I think more worrying than the trade-off of the more worrying than the active bishop pair is the fact that black can simply play. So takes d5, queen takes c3. Let's see. Actually, this looks a lot worse now that I'm looking at it a little closer. Let's see. Castles. Rook 1. Getting here. And this pawn looks a little scary. So black's won a pawn, but white definitely has compensation for it. This pawn is very scary. Black is not very developed. I mean, black does have ideas of running these two pawns down to promotion, but I'm not sure if that's going to be possible. It's very likely that white can just support this pawn here to promotion much more quickly. So you made what I feel is a better decision, d6, and white likely castled, and he did. So you carry through with the plan, knight d7. So let's take a brief look at this position. And Knight BD7, the only other real move that would have made that make sense is this. But I think the knight might be slightly better. Um, Not entirely sure at this moment where this bishop is going to be going at this point. So you play knight BD7, and we take a brief look, see if any of the weaknesses in the position have changed. Um, for us, this pawn could become dangerously weak as we don't have a dark squared bishop to support it. This knight is in the way of our rook, or of our rooks possibly supporting it. So our only supporting piece is the queen. So if he can find a way to attack it, and with maybe bishop here, and I'm not sure how else to get a piece attacking this. Bishop here, and somehow support this pawn push forward. It could be problematic. It's just a potential weakness to keep in mind. It's not a real weakness yet. Um, this pawn also potentially weak, along with this knight. So once again we don't have a dark squared bishop, so we're weakening these squares. So this bishop is going to be very strong, and our dark squares are going to be very weak. This is going to be one of our weakest dark squares because the only way we can really cover it is either by castling and using our king, or by moving, neither of which are particularly appetizing options. For some reason, it doesn't want to get rid of that arrow, so we're going to leave it. So he plays queen d3. Maybe looking to come to either b4 or a3 to attack our weakness. I'm not sure if that's the best move. I think maybe better would have been e1, just supporting a strong center. Maybe another option would be, rook b1, because now we have pressure along of this half open file, and this pawn is pretty stuck. It certainly cannot come to b5 because of the pawn on c4. Pretty much the stereotypical issue that black faces in the Marsozi bind like positions. Let me double check the chat room. I don't think there's anybody in it, but it crashed for some reason, so let's double check. And if there are any audio issues, please let me know. It's saying that there might be some, but I can't quite tell. Let me double check real quick. Nope, we're good. So let's see what you said about queen b3, because you say it also looked weak. You also note that it's likely trying to pressure this pawn, which it might be, but that's not a very good way to pressure it. The rook is just a strictly better way to take control of his file. What else do you say? You thought about the immediate threat of knight c5, which seems like a reasonable threat to make. You are attacking both this undefended bishop and the queen, so you're going to force queen c2. So you've just gained a tempo for free now, and now we can play maybe something like knight g4, trying to put some pressure on the king side. Not sure if this is best. We're also going to try and trade off. So he's going to play queen e2. He doesn't want to double pawns. So we end up with a position like this, where we've eliminated that weakness on the dark squares that we had. and the cost is that black has these two half open diagonals that could be pretty strong later in the game. So you decide to play it safe and go with a little bit less ambitious, I guess I would say, of a move of castling. Um, Not any worse, just less ambitious. I think this is playing safer, which is good, but it gives you less attacking chances. You're not really utilizing the opportunities you're given. It doesn't matter though. He ends up playing Queen C2 anyway. He just loses the tempo. That makes me want to go back and mark this Queen B3 with a double question mark, because what was the point of the move if he immediately undid it? The one reason he may have decided to move the queen back to C2 now is that after pushing this pawn forward, we have both of these. We have this strong battery here on H7 that we might be able to utilize with something like bishop here, cleaning up this knight, and then we're not in any real trouble with black, or as white. We've just got a lot of pressure. These are arrows are messing up. So you seem to notice that that push is worrying to push here. You also note that your d6 pawn is relatively weak, and you feel that e5 is an adequate way to defend it because now there is a blockade of sorts in front of it along the a2 diagonal. This seems reasonable. It's definitely a thematic move in Marsozi's bind-like situations. You definitely want to try and undermine white center throughout the entire game. I think another interesting move might have been knight c5 again, where after maybe bishop g5, queen e, or actually it would be, let's go knight d first. Let's see what happens. I don't think you can do this. Because we just play knight c5 again, and we have a strong centralized knight. For the bishop, for this knight here, so we've gotten rid of his strong bishop holding together center for a knight here. So the best way for him to retake would be this way. And then here we can just play knight d7, and we have another knight coming to either c5 or e5 very quickly, and where we will gain a tempo on the queen. So that was another idea to consider. It's just another way to undermine the center, which is what we're trying to do. I don't know why I was looking at the tree. We're obviously not in book anymore. I mean, we very well could be. We're only 12 moves into a Sicilian game. But you're not studying extensive amounts of theories, so you're not going to find those sort of things. So he decides to respond with knight f5. A good move. And a historical note I guess I should make is that f5 was Bobby Fischer's favorite square for a knight as white. His reasoning was it attacks d6, e7, and g7, all of which are key squares in black's camp, and additionally it puts pressure on the h6 square. So these are all very key squares in the defense of black's position in a lot of openings. So let's just take a random position, for example. Say we are in the position we have. It's a good example position. What are our key defending pieces right now? Well, our G7 pawn, right here, that wasn't supposed to be an arrow, but it works. Right there, and this guy right here, these guys right here are our two key defending squares holding our position together. Now, why are these our key defending our key defenders in this position? Well, this knight wants to have the mobility to come somewhere like here. That's not what I wanted. Give me a different color. Wants to come somewhere like here. And, not there, there. Sorry guys. Still bad at this. Why? Why? There. Alright, wants to be able to come somewhere like here. And when this knight on d7 moves, this g7 pawn will not only be the pawn in front of our king, it will also be the only thing defending. What is my thing doing? That was not what I clicked at all. You guys saw. It will be the only thing defending this knight. So, why is this knight so important? It's the only thing defending this other than our king. So you can really see how this pawn is a linchpin of the position on this side. Additionally, it's covering the only defender we have on the dark squares on the king side. So this guy, what is he defending right now? Our rook can only defend, let's mark it, on the king side. We're only talking about king side squares. He only defends these two squares. Why? Because the king prevents him from coming over here, the pawn prevents him from going any further. Both light squares. The knight defends here and here, light squares. King only defends here and here. Once again, light squares. I guess the king also defends here and here, but we don't want to use the king as a defending piece too much. So, as we see, our dark squares are a little weak, so these pawns are very important, and the knight on f5 is very good at pressuring those. So here you make what I think is a great move, but it does underline the importance of this g7 pawn as a defender of the knight on f6, and that is knight c5. It pressures white's bishop on d3, which you are correct is a very good thing to do, and you do have a discovered attack on the knight on f5. A very good move, solving a lot of your weaknesses while creating weaknesses, namely a weakness on the light squares, or threatening to create a weakness on the light squares by playing knight takes d3. So, how does white respond? Well, I think the best response would likely be bishop takes c5, which, again, is solving another one of your problems for you, removing a bit of this weakness on the dark squares. In fact, now you have control of the dark squares in the center. So that's one way to solve a problem. One issue with this is knight f7 check, or e7 check. And if we get to an endgame, maybe this bishop will be able to be more mobile. Because in open endgames, the bishop's mobility definitely helps it out a lot. Your opponent did not decide to go that sort of route. I mean, even if he decides to take off the dark side of the bishop, he doesn't have to play this knight e7 check sort of route. He can play something like rook fb1, or ab1, sorry. Not fb1. The f rook wants to come to d. Then you can play bishop and create another doubled pawn that will be a weakness that you can attack. So this position looks good for black. Tough to play, but definitely not unreasonable. One of the big issues in this position is now that this previously strong c4 pawn is going to be a little bit more difficult for white to defend. Um, and that will be because that this bishop here is going to be tasked with defending both of these pawns, and you're likely to be able to exploit that. Instead of playing anything like that, he decides to play f3. I'm not sure I like that. Not even going to say I'm not sure I like that move. I'm going to say I definitely don't like that move. I understand what he's trying to do. He's trying to put his pawns onto the light squares because he has the dark squared bishop right now. And when you have the only bishop of a given color, you want your pawns on the opposite color. That way, your pawns are, say you have a light squared bishop and they have a dark squared bishop. If your pawns are on the dark squares, your light squared bishop has the mobility to attack their pawns and isn't blocked in by your own pawns. Pretty straightforward. Um, so that's true even if you both have light squared bishops. You want your pawns on the dark squares, which you've done a decent job of doing so far. Dark squares here. Give you one diagonal. Now if you can put these pawns up here and trade off this dark squared bishop and have a light squared bishop endgame, you could have a pretty solid position as he just placed another pawn on the light square. So that's what he's trying to do, just sort of open up those dark squares. Um, in theory, it's a good idea, but the problem is the king is on this diagonal, and the queen can come to this diagonal pretty easily. So we'll see how you decide to exploit it. You decide that just bishop d7. Um, not a bad move. Not the most trying, just a little passive. Maybe something like bishop takes here, and then we create another set of double pawns. And there's a good chance that you'll be able to create a pass pawn situation. Most likely with this d pawn, as these two pawns here. whoop, As these two pawns here are weak, you might be able to create a pass pawn pretty easily with something like whoop, knight takes, queen takes, rook. So this seems like a pretty good position for black, where you are just going to be pressuring this pawn here. So one of the things you definitely want to keep in mind is the ability to create pass pawns, or not even creating pass pawns themselves, but creating the potential to create a pass pawn. In and of itself is often enough to win games. Pass pawns are very dangerous, um, and definitely something you should keep in mind while playing. So now you say that your rooks are finally connected, which is good. Definitely something you want to do. Um, and you are worried about that d6 pawn again. I, I, I can understand that. I don't think you need to be quite yet. Because if he tries to attack it with, say, bishop here, you can, let's see. Well, see, if he plays it with bishop here, you're gonna have time to play this rook here first, and then once he plays bishop back, you simply play bishop. I can create a quick demonstration for that. Um, so one way to deal with that threat is this sort of thing. Um, maybe not the best way to deal with the threat. You seem to think you have found a really great way of dealing with it. Um, which, of course, you did. You found the tactical blow, bishop 4, which is very good. Very, very good idea to keep in mind these tactics, especially these skewers. They are a very common theme that you will run into, and they're they can win you games in and of themselves. So he falls victim to the skewer. You play takes d1, and you play rook takes d1. So now you're ahead in exchange, and but this is going to be under very serious pressure after bishop drops back. So one way to deal with that would be something like this. Maybe not the best way to deal with it, but it's an option. You decide to go with knight takes d3. Very good idea. When you're up in exchange, there's no problem with trading off material. As material falls off the board, your advantage is going to become more apparent. It's going to be easier for you to clean up pawns. Your rook is going to be more dominant as less material sits on the board. So basically, your rook is going to dominate this bishop more and more, especially on the light squares, as pieces like the knights and light square bishops come off the board. So this is a very, very good idea. It's a great way to handle the position. So he takes with queen d3, rook fd. So you saw that this is attacked by 3 pieces, and decided to defend it. The problem with that is you're defending it, but it only has 2 defenders and 3 attackers, so he can just play this if he wanted to. Whoop, not what I wanted. And he just got the pawn back. Um, Still looks good for black just because you're up that exchange, but it was just something to keep in mind. Uh, you did defend it, but it was too late to adequately defend the piece. Um, Another thing he might have tried was bishop g5. And I'm not really sure if white or if black is decisively winning here. You do have the extra material, so you should win, but black is posing practical problems. This pawn is going to fall, and you can likely have your king side torn open by this bishop takes. So just something to keep in mind. King h1. Um, you weren't sure what he was potentially threatening. Um, he does put himself in danger of back rank mate. I think what he was worried about is that you could somehow remove this bishop and play queen h1 or queen either b6 or c5 with check, um, making some sort of alternative threat. Um, I mean, it's very much a phantom threat, but it could be what he was worried about. Looks like you gave your own. No, these are my variations. So you play rook c8, rook ac8, of course, as you're defending here. So you're stepping up the pressure on the c file, where you are going to be able to snap off this pawn, which is a very, very good thing to target. That was one of the weaknesses we talked about earlier, and it has been a continued weakness for white throughout the game. And if you could snap that off, bishop c5, b5 suddenly becomes playable. Should hit the right button. Bishop b5 suddenly becomes playable. So he plays queen b1, um, pressuring the b square. I think maybe again bishop d5, or maybe even knight here. Is there a tactical blow here? Okay, I see. I see the tactical blow now. See, now the problem is that you can play this at some point, and the knight's going to be pinned to the queen. Okay, so that's why you can't take that pawn. Um, nice little tactical blow there, preventing that. Worth looking at, though. Always worth calculating, even if it is a pretty simple tactic that prevents it. So he plays queen b1. The point of that is if you take here, he just takes here, and then I'm not actually sure where white's queen can go. That doesn't work because of the knight. Maybe takes d6. Okay, there we go. It's rook takes d6 because you can't take here because of back rank made. Okay, I knew there had to be a way to make that work. You feel rook d7 was the correct move. Your move, knight e8 because of the cube that is being threatened. Rook d7 likely the best move. And it looks like you actually look queen takes c4, queen takes b. Uh, b8, queen a7. Um, queen a7 could be decent. But it misses the point of winning equal material. So if you play queen a7, white can just take here again. And now after rook takes d6, you have rook b1 check, bishop g1, and this looks pretty solid for black. I can understand why this would be scary. It's a very sharp tactical position, but it's definitely something worth looking at in the future. Alright, so you also looked at knight takes here, forking, but then you have rook takes d6. So let's see if we can look at this real quickly. That's 20, queen takes c4, knight takes. We can play. Queen a4. Okay, and now because of this weakness that you highlighted he created, he can no longer play knight takes here because of check, check, and mate. So a very real threat that you have to keep in mind. So this knight d6 is much less scary than it looks. So you looked at rook takes b6, rook takes d6, which throws away the advantage that the position has created for you. But I can understand why you would miss that. It's very hard to see that this queen magically threatens the d1 square unless you are familiar with that sort of pattern. So as you play more chess and analyze your games, you get more used to seeing those sorts of patterns. I'm still very bad at them, hence why it took me so long to notice it. Alright, so instead you played knight e... Not that. I want to go back to the main line. You played knight e8. Yes, a blunder, but not as huge as a double question mark. It's only really... I mean, I guess you do drop a piece for an exchange, but you're not throwing away the game. It's not a loss yet. Um, After bishop, you took c, which is fine. Seems like a reasonable way to deal with the position. Bishop takes, and here, um, looks pretty equal. A better way to deal with this position might have been queen b8. Because the reason this might be better is because this is a static weakness, which gives me brings me to a brief topic I should talk about for a quick second. There are two main types of weaknesses in chess. There are static weaknesses and dynamic weaknesses. Static weakness is a weakness that will be a weakness for a long period of time, over many, many moves. It's going to always be a weakness. So these doubled pawns are a static weakness. They're never going to stop being a weakness unless you make a move that makes them no longer be a weakness. So unless black does something that allows white to remove that weakness, the doubled pawns on the c file are always going to be a weakness. A dynamic weakness, on the other hand, is, that was the wrong button. A dynamic weakness, on the other hand, is, say, the weakness on of the, not what I wanted, of the b7 square. So if we were to take up here, after we goes here, if we were to take up here, this pawn here is a dynamic weakness. If he doesn't take right now, so say he plays a token move, rook here, then rook d7, and this is not a real major weakness anymore. Another example of a dynamic weakness is just maybe a weakness on of a given square. Right now, we're very weak on the d5 square, but maybe at some point we can fix that weakness with something like a d5 push, where he would take, and we would take with the rook, and now he no longer has control of a d5 square, and it's no longer a weakness. Just something to keep in mind. So, let's find position. We ended up at the position where you snatch the pawn, and you say it's incorrectly, giving up in the attempt to regain the material advantage. And you find the complete line. You find e7, king f8, knight c6, and the rook is trapped. All right, exactly. So you've got it. That is exactly the weakness in this position, because your queen is not covering a key square, and you are in danger of this knight check. So let's try and find a better move in this position. So we know his threat is that he wants to come here and take away all the squares for our rook and then attempt to win it. So the easiest way to deal with that is let's remove the piece threatening all those squares. So we play queen b5, which now if he tries knight, we go king f8. And if he tries this trap again, we just take the queen and he loses. So it doesn't work anymore. So that deals with the threat that we had. Is it a strange way to deal with the threat? It is, but it deals with the threat, and that's what we're focusing on. Now, he, in fact, is being threatened with the queen getting taken. So he has to play either queen e7, or maybe better, rook b1, queen takes b7, rook takes b7, and white looks a little better here, but it's not disastrous. Maybe black is a better one, maybe king f, and then rook, rook c8, rook takes h3 because of the mate threat on c8 or c1, and check, king h2, and maybe something better. From here, I'm not sure where to go. We're just behind the rook, behind the pawn. But that seems dangerous after rook a8, and now this knight is trapped. So, potential danger in this situation, but it's one way to deal with the threat. It doesn't seem too terrible. After snatching the pawn, yeah, the game should be over, but as you said, he misses it. Queen e7, and now you have the strong queen a4 threatening mate, forcing rook b1, after which queen d7, queen takes d7, rook takes d7, rook b8, and here black looks just fine. It looks either drawn or like black will win this game in the end. Um, maybe something like this. No, no, that's bad because of obviously mate. What am I talking about? I should be bad. I should be less bad at chess. So we deal with the mate threat first. Oh, I didn't even realize I saw the engine running. Um, so yeah, we just deal with the mate threat, and here looks relatively equal. Queen c2. You did not see any way of regaining equality. So you try to attack the white's rook. Um, the problem with this is manifold, namely, let's see. Obviously you can't do that because obviously he can't do this because of the mate threat. Sorry, I'm like trying to talk, but I can't. Um, so it seems like a decent move, but knight e3 threatening the queen. Maybe rook takes d6, queen c1. Okay. Okay, I thought maybe those were your comments and I just wasn't paying attention. Okay. So, threatening the queen and defending the rook, a very good move. You take queen takes c3, attacking the knight. And missing queen takes d8, threatening mate here. So now that we have to deal with mate, you play h6. Reasonable way to deal with the mate. Queen takes e8. And I think the rest of this game was pretty token when I looked at it before. So you're making a mate threat again. He deals with it. Maybe a better way to... There may have been a better way to deal with this mate threat, but I'm not sure. So, g6, trying to kick away the knight. He plays here. He can sack the knight for these two pawns. So really, black's only hope is walking this pawn down. But I don't see that being feasible. You're just down too much material. h5, check, check, and here you just had to sack material to prevent mate, and you just ended up getting mated. A very good, well-played game up until here. Um, it looked relatively even. Let's check with the analysis engines right in this position. I had them start and they crashed, so let's see what they say. See what they would have said. Uh, yeah, it looks pretty lost right here. Let's see. Okay, so it looks like you were correct after queen c2, losing move. Um, they seem to agree that queen a4 was the proper way of handling the situation, where black maintains a slight edge. his mission's uncomfortable, he, but you definitely have a fighting chances. Definitely have something to work with this pawn being passed. So you can just walk on down. Um, you also have the still tangible target of here, and then the ability to potentially create a pass pawn with your D pawn, and the ever looming danger of back rank mate because of the poor positioning of the king. So that was likely a better way to handle it. So after queen c2, um, it's just pretty much over after knight e3. Is there a better way of handling it than the queen takes c3? Um, queen e2, maybe, is the engine recommendation, but even that fails after. And here, black is just losing. Um, I don't know if I don't really have much more to say about the game. Um, we can go through it relatively quickly. It was a pretty well played game. The comments were very good. You did a very good job of pointing out what you were trying to deal with. That's definitely one of the things you want to do. Um, Another thing to think about when you're analyzing your own games is, were the threats you were dealing with real threats or imagined? And maybe did you miss a threat? Was the threat static or dynamic? Did you act on a threat too soon? Um, if you can win a rook um, or develop a piece, then win that same rook the next turn, it's better to win the rook the second turn after developing, potentially. Basically, there's no hurry in winning material if it's forced. Stuff like that you can look at. I don't know if that particular issue came up in this game. It's just something that the skewers made me think about. Like, skewers like that, you don't always have to play them immediately. In this game, maybe you did. I didn't look too closely. But definitely worth looking at. Anyway, that does it for my analysis of this game. I will be posting it up to YouTube shortly. That will be at Bosk Chess. If anybody has any questions, comments, please put them in the chat or email me at bosskchess@gmail.com. That's BOSSK chess@gmail.com. BOSSK chess@gmail.com. Feel free to submit your analysis of your games, and I will definitely go over them. And hopefully I didn't do too bad today. I felt a little bit better than last times, but I'm not sure. Anybody has any lingering questions, please let me know. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to be going over a little bit about how skid versus PC works today or not. It a uh, took a bit longer than I had hoped to get everything set up, and I'm still not entirely familiar with all the ins and outs of skid versus PC, but it is one of the things I want to talk to you guys about how to use at a later date. Anyway, be sure to check it out on YouTube, and I'll see you guys later.